7 of PBQ Slush Pile. We take more time than other editorial boards, but we stand behind our methodology, so much so that we're going to share our process with you through this podcast. Welcome to the editorial table. We have a couple of new things happening today. We have a stand-in engineer, Ryan McDonald. So we're going to be going, hey, Ryan, what's the vote? Instead of, hey, Joe, what's the vote? And we have one of our interns with us today, Sarah Akit, and she's here to take notes and just, be in awe of the wonder of podcasting in a general way. So I'm here, as usual, in the studio in Philadelphia. I'm Kathleen Volkmiller, co-editor for more than 20 years with Marian Wren, and director of the graduate program in publishing here at Drexel, among many other things. I have to put on many different hats around here, but it's all good. And with me in the studio is Tim Fitz.
Hi, I'm Tim Fitz, and I teach here at Drexel. I teach first-year writing, and I've been reading with the Painted Bride Quarterly for about 3 years now, and I write short stories mostly, and I have a novel coming out with Hen Press, hopefully next month, and I have a new story coming out next month in a YA journal called Yarn.
Wow, that's cool. I didn't know about that. Yeah. I'm glad there are YA journals.
Yeah, I was a little hesitant because I wasn't really sure about that genre, but when I checked out their website, they have a lot of readers.
Yeah,
and so it's so I thought it'd be nice to explore.
Yeah,
it was a story selected for that, so I didn't write it specifically for a YA audience, and I'm not really sure how to do that. They just said, yeah, this will work for them, and so it was a story based on a bunch of 14-year-olds anyway.
Yeah,
so
cool.
So yeah, that'll be fun.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Who else do we have out there? Abu Dhabi, why don't you go first?
Hello, this is Marian Wren, and I'm glad to be. Although that sounded like a fantabulous conversation that you had. I am sitting in my apartment in Abu Dhabi. It is 8:00 at night, and I am watching like 30 people, 40 people, like leave the building across the street because they're leaving a lecture that had to do with the sort of evolving relationship of journalism and war in the 21st century.
Oh, wow.
So I'm watching a conference sort of be I don't know, like set free into the courtyard across the way from my apartment. So that's where I am.
Very cool. Jason?
This is Jason Schneiderman. I am in San Francisco today because I am doing a reading tomorrow night at Books Inc. in the Castro for my new book, Primary Source.
Woo! That's fun and different to be calling from San Francisco.
It's nice out here. It's earlier. It's a lot early. Apparently San Francisco is on an earlier time.
Apparently. So wait, it's 8 in the morning. No, it's 9 in the morning.
It's 9 in the morning.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad we caught you. Miriam.
I'm Miriam Heyer. I'm a senior editor of the Painted Bride Quarterly, and I am not anywhere that I'm usually, that's out of my usual life. I am still in Union Square in New York. And this morning, the only really exciting thing that happened to me was that even though I get my tea from the same place every morning for years and years, today they put a lemon slice in it. So I'm pretty sure that anything is possible right now.
I think it's Beyonce. I would blame Beyonce. But nobody gets that.
Lemon. Yes,
only my intern gets it. It's lemonade. Nobody can get lemonade off their minds.
No.
Oh, dear God.
You watched it?
I did not watch it. But in America in 2016, we don't need to actually watch things to know everything about them, do we?
Well, right. I mean, I've read so many think pieces about it.
Yeah. Watch it? Who watches it? I just read about it. So anyway, cool. I think moving forward, as we've done before, when Miriam and Marian are both with us, we'll call Marian Dr. Wren or Wren to distinguish their similar sounding names. Okay, so remember, as usual, that the poems themselves can be found on the Painted Bride Quarterly website at pbq.drexel.edu. And if you have any comments that you'd like to share with us, please do so on our Facebook event for this episode, which is episode 7. So let's get rolling. We have 2 poems by a poet named Paul Nielsen, and the first one is called Coyote. Who would like to read?
I'll read it.
Okay.
And I think the poet's name is Paul Nelson,
Oh, right.
not Nielsen. So
I don't
Paul
know why I did
Nelson.
that. Yeah.
And I am, well, I'll tell you why, because is it coyote or coyote?
Yeah, I don't know why.
So
It's Paul Nelson. It's not Coyote.
Isn't it coyote? But can't we sound like we're gunslingers and say coyote? All right, sorry. I'm really looking forward to reading these poems. So here we go. Coyote by Paul Nelson. Last December, just beyond the windows where we stand with wine, she clawed for frozen apples in her new coat. Beneath the tree, the children climbed. Just bread, we guessed. I wanted to caress her muzzle and ears, lower my face to her eyes, say something as if she were a dog, something fatuous and loving. You laughed because I said I would take anything she offered, teeth or tongue.
All right. Well, that's quite a moment. And for me, it doesn't I'm not fully engrossed until that second stanza, which is everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not to start off negatively, but just beyond the windows where we stand with wine gives me a big eye roll.
I really, but that last stanza is really great. I mean, anything
Yes.
she offered to her tongue is a fantastic line.
Mm-hmm.
It is. It really is.
It really is.
What's the Matthew Arnold poem where they're standing by the window looking out at ignorant armies clashing by night? Come stand by the window. What's that poem? Oh, don't make me resort to Google. I'm going in. Talk amongst yourselves.
Google. Don't do it. What's the relevance anyway?
Dover Beach. Blessings. Who said it?
Miriam said it, but Google said it. So
Yeah.
Oh, Miriam, well done, friend. But yeah, so it Dover beaches me right in that first stanza, which is like, stand me next to a window, and I'm thinking Matthew Arnold, right? Especially with a glass of wine in my hand, looking out at the horizon. But anyway, so Miriam, what were you saying about the piece?
Actually, the wine didn't bother me. I had a temporary, tense misunderstanding because I suppose that's like where we always stand with wine or where we usually stand with wine.
Oh,
because all of a sudden then we're in past. And that was just like a little, and I don't know if that's just my brain or if that is an actual clunk in the poem, but the image I thought was nice. The image did something.
I think they always stand there with wine, which was why
at that particular window.
Is that why you had the eye roll? Because that's like the window wine, the wine window?
That's
the wine window. Where they drink their window wine.
Well, it sounds like they have a very nice view. I mean, they have this tree with apples and children climbing. It's very idyllic.
It is. But I have to say, I do like the way the poet is playing with sound in what seems like a sort of mundane setup, right? Where we stand with wine, she clawed for frozen apples in her new coat. Beneath the tree, the children climbed. And climbed is at the end of the fourth line, and just so directly echoes wine, which is in the middle of the second line. So there's a tightness to it, even though it's a sort of like almost like a place, it's like conjuring. It's like, pay attention, here we go. And then the poem kicks in, the image kicks in the second stanza.
Mm-hmm.
And the dominance of the W and the K sounds.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, windows where we stand with wine, new, right? It's a nicely registered play with sound.
When it says in the new coat, just bread, does that mean that it's like a baby coyote? Is this like a... It's like a very small coyote.
That was a grammar thing that I was wondering if anybody was gonna, make a snarky remark about the just bred we guessed actually comes after the children. But yeah, I think the new coated is supposed to be a new coyote.
Yeah.
Right.
And the other thing was like just bred was right because like just bred means conceived as opposed to just born.
Yeah, no, I think yeah. I mean, I don't know enough about coyotes. I might be just showing off my ignorance of the animal kingdom, but do they get like a new coat for winter, or is there some seasonal thing that's happening?
Don't Google it, anybody. Last December in her new coat, it kind of would make sense. Wouldn't it be new if she's a baby, the coyote? Or if it's December, they might get new.
They probably do. It probably thickens.
Yeah, I mean,
so
regular dogs do,
yeah.
right?
I'm so glad we're talking about that verb bred, though, because I'm with Jason. Like for a second, I was like, wait, does that mean she's newly born or like newly stoked, right? Like to breed cattle, right, means like you're inseminating cattle in order to have more calves, right? So I don't know, like I guess bred gets used that way, like she's newly birthed.
Yeah, I think the way you guys are talking about bred, I never thought of bred as just the conception.
It's also intentional, right? It's not bred.
Well, I was wondering if that was just brought up, or has she reached some kind of like point where she's wandering around? Like I didn't think it was that she was at the very beginning of her life.
Mm-hmm.
I think the bred coming after children and just before the coyote for me is a little confusing. And for me, the second stanza works so well. Without it, I don't really know why it's there because it doesn't. Maybe it does add something that I'm not getting, but it seems like the poem starts really humming with that second stanza, and particularly because coyotes, the way they capture their prey is they'll go into a neighborhood or go into an area with dogs and they'll play with the dogs or they'll pretend to be hurt and lure them into the woods and then rip them apart with their friends.
Really?
Yeah.
What?
So this is, I'm from Florida. So this is what the coyote's trying to do. I mean, he's just playing with the people to try to get them to come off into the woods.
So if the title was Coyote, would still know I wanted to caress her muzzle and ears would mean the coyote.
Yeah.
Right? If we kept the title and got rid of the whole first stanza.
Yeah, I like that idea. We should lure this poem into the woods and rip the first half off.
Just to kind of go back to the first stanza with maybe a little bit less of a murderous instinct. I think that I kind of like the idea of being at the end of the year where the apples are frozen and there's some like transition thing happening. The children are hanging out in the same place that the coyote hangs out in, and they're all being. I mean, there's some. I don't know. To me, it's significant that we're at a beginning and ending point, and these young things or these frozen things are trying to figure out like how to move in this season. And I don't, the first stanza doesn't offend me that much.
Yeah, the wine thing also kind of bothers me a little bit, but it doesn't really offend me. But it doesn't do for me what the second stanza does.
Mm-hmm.
For me,
I don't know that it offends, Kathy. That's a slightly strong word.
What's that?
Offends is such a strong word.
Yeah. No, it's not offensive.
Kathy, were you saying that you just didn't like it, right?
Right. I just think
but Miriam raised the offense, right? She raised that as a possibility, right?
Those of you who know me know that I have I have an aversion to affectations and feeling the poet, the ethereal presence there, thinking about how he looks. Do you know what I mean? And that's my issue with the wine. Is there's just something, affected about that whole little scene. And then we do have our clunks. We have the clunk that Marion had with Where We Stand with Wine, which I did read, Miriam, as because we always stand. It's our wine window, right? But then also the just bred we guessed and this new code in December, and is it a baby coyote, and all those questions. It just seems like really overly complicated to just set the scene, right? If the intent of that stanza is to give us the moment, right? We're tripping over it in a lot of ways, right? But man, I do want to get to that second stanza.
Yeah, I mean, when the second stanza starts, if I totally ignore it, I'm right there anyway.
Mm-hmm.
With it doesn't matter. We know the person's in some sort of neighborhood, just because the tone of it and wanting to caress the muzzle and ears. I mean, it's clear that the coyote has come to that person and is pretending to be nice. And I like that. It reminds me of, I think I've brought this up in the last podcast, but I think it was a Robin Black interview where she said before she writes, she goes swimming in the ocean because she likes the idea of floating over dark water where anything could eat her.
Oh.
And so she then, her mind is sort of calibrated to the objective bluntness of the world.
Wow.
And I like this sort of tone. It's a similar kind of thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You just talked me into the first stanza.
Oh, did I?
Yeah. Because now it's just like so much more of an innocuous first stanza. Like, here we are having our wine at our wine window. And when lo, here comes a suspicious coyote playing near our children. Are they the speaker's children?
I assume so.
Yeah. The children.
Well, we don't really know where the children are in time. It could have been the tree that the children used to climb or something.
Yeah.
Or climbed once or something. Yeah.
Right. So I guess that's the mood that it strikes for me. It's like all of these things are at such a distance, like such a recess, and except for this, coyote picking at the frozen apples, right? And the children once climbed the tree. It's frozen ground now, so it's they're in that sort of gray atmosphere, but they're warm and tucked away and safe inside, and they're contemplating this scene. And I Tim, I love your description of what coyotes do, because it feels like that's exactly what happens to the speaker, right? Seduced into wanting to love this animal that will eat his face, So yes,
my brother-in-law records the coyotes in Florida, about a block away. When they lure animals back there, they start yiping, about a ton of them at a time, and he'll record it on his iPhone.
Oh my God. We need to put one of these on this podcast. Can you get him to send us one?
I can probably get it. I mean, you do it all the time.
You guys would have been on like an animal thing. Was it just episode 6 where we had the cats, Miriam? Or we thought maybe cats? We had a bloody stair railing, and remember all that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
That's right.
Marriage?
Yowling animals / babies.
Yeah.
That was really disturbing.
If you missed it, go listen to episode 6.
The monsters issue. It's going to be gruesome.
And did we mention that this is for monsters as well?
I don't think we did. Thank you for mentioning it.
That's an important thing to mention.
Yeah. Well, I feel like I've learned a ton about coyotes in this discussion, and I really am sort of moved by the work of this poem. So,
all right, that sounds like a call to vote.
Yeah,
it is. Can we yipe? Can we yipe like the coyotes? Can we yipe our vote?
You can yipe all you want, but why don't you also send a message to Ryan?
Okay.
You do that, and we'll do our 1, 2, 3 up in here, up in Philly, right? So 1, 2, 3, vote. What's the score, Ryan?
3 yes.
3 yes. So guess what? That is unanimous for Peter Nelson.
Oh.
So
we have more coyotes. We have
well, this one. The next one is called Coyotes, plural. So there's.
Oh, it's like aliens.
Yes.
Like we have the original.
Yeah. Well, if we go back to themes for print 9, we might consider animals. We get a
That's
lot
not
of
bad.
animals, right? Yeah. There aren't enough animals in literature. Well, no, there are. There's tons. What am I thinking?
There's
Okay.
animal studies is like the super burgeoning field.
Yeah.
In fact, I'll have you know, I just saw Una Chaudhry, who is, a sort of heavy hitter, walk out of that conference on war and journalism. So just so you know, if we do something on animals, we'll just go get Una Chaudhry to send us some work.
Chaudhry is a heavy hitter in what?
Animal studies.
Oh.
Yeah, she basically founded the field.
Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. That's crazy. That's a sign. All right, but who's going to read Coyotes?
Can I read it? I'll read Coyotes.
Absolutely.
All right. Coyotes. In a shaft of brass light, down through spruce, a big chocolate male done for the year pads across moss, dissolves in shadow. The tattered blonde bitch stands in bright spring grass edging the woods. Hanks drag from her molting flanks, ears alert for mice and voles. 2 pale kits dive after each other. Shorter ears and heavier bodied than Western cartoons, coy dog, some say. Her heavy rotting tail drapes, eyes generous and frank. This morning, on the 3 legs, another bitch crabs across Nebraska's I-90 in a whiteout. Men standing down at truck stops, diesels thrumming and clacking in the lots. Shaky behind the slapping wipers, I barely see her hop south of the barbed wire onto stubbled acres of ice and drifting snow, where men set traps to kill vermin that will freeze. Coil down on steel and chain, get skinned and nailed to a shed with others, or thaw come spring to feed the ravens. She chewed her own leg off. A 16-wheeler passes like a war. I draft in its wake as it shells the storm over and by me, watching for its taillights to blink. Muzzle flash, signals to follow in the blur.
Even though the image of an animal trapped chews its own leg off is kind of a worn image, I like it here because it seems like the coyote is aware of the previous 2 lines. Maybe I'm reading into it, but it just seems, because coyotes are smart animals, and it seems like they know how awful it's going to get for them.
The catalyst to chewing her leg off is because she knows she could be skinned and nailed to a shed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, those images right up against each other like that make you think, yeah, I would chew my leg off too.
Yeah.
Right.
When I was reading these to get ready for today, I actually preferred the Coyote to Coyotes. And now I think I'm more moved by Coyotes, reading it out loud and kind of talking about it.
Mm-hmm. What do you think it is?
Well, I think that I think it's talking about coyotes. I think it's sort of thinking about them as smarter animals. I think when I was reading of coyotes as anything other than wilder dogs. And now I'm sort of thinking about coyotes as these kind of manipulative, vicious animals who present themselves as wounded, but also are wounded. I'm more compelled. And it felt really nice to read it. I liked the sound a lot of coyotes when I was reading it out loud.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love a 16-wheeler passes like a war. When the next line, I draft in its wake as it shelves the storm. What is draft there?
Oh, that's when you're driving behind because there's a snowstorm, and so it's like he's using the 16-wheeler is blocking the storm basically,
right?
And so he's in the space behind the 16-wheeler where he can see, because all he has to see is a 16-wheeler because it's blocking out the rest of the snow. So that's the drafting in the wake.
Yeah, and the draft is the air that's pulled behind the truck. Yeah.
Right. So, but it's a 16-wheeler passes like a war. So they passed each other on the highway. Mm-hmm. So the wake of the wheeler, right, has just shelved the storm over and by, right?
I draft.
So I'm like, and it's funny watching for its taillights to blink, muzzle flash, signals to follow in the blur. Like I was reading it like Jason was reading, right? That as if the driver is like riding behind the truck in order to catch the space, right, available, like to sort of tailgate the truck. But if it's a 16-wheeler passes like a war, I draft in its wake as it shelves the storm over and by me. How does that work?
Well, I think the 16-wheeler is passing the Coyote. Like, I almost wanted that to be part of the previous stanza. And then this I to come in with the last, you know, I mean, now I'm just like editing ruthlessly, but I feel like if that line was previous, it would be not only clearer, but I think that the entrance of the I might be more impactful.
Yeah, you're right. You're actually, yeah, that's great. And then it also gives it the space to see that it's not like a truck passes and kicks snow over me, right? It's a 16-wheeler passes like a war right after she chewed her own leg off. Ends the comment, right? And then it's I draft in its wake as it shelves the storm over and by me. Yeah. That space would make that clear.
It's also, I mean, I love the violence of, you know, she chewed her own leg off, and then the kind of idea that the technology of this 16-wheeler presents a new violence, like a human violence that's connected to war. And I just think that those two violences being right next to each other would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really a beautiful ending again. You know, that's just quite an image to hang there on the ending.
What is the muzzle flash?
I think I love the way that does double work, right? Like on one hand, you see muzzle, and I was thinking it was like the dog's, like the coyote's muzzle, but it's muzzle flash, which takes you back up to the truck. If it passes like a war, then those taillights look like gun flashes, like the muzzle of a gun.
Oh.
And then signals to follow in the blur, right? So the taillights are blinking like muzzle flashes. So that's my take on it.
That's
I was also briefly wondering if draft was doing double work, and if the poet or, you know, the speaker is kind of already thinking about how to describe this experience even as he's following this 16-wheeler. Like I don't know if I have any evidence for that, but.
Well, and I saw the muzzle as the coyote's muzzle, that he would get a glimpse of it, just a muzzle flash, right? As the taillights blink, that's he's going to grab a flash of the muzzle of the coyote that's there. So that's how I took them. But so it's terrific, I think, that we're having these multiple.
Yeah. So because
meetings.
I think that's great. So the taillights signal to follow in the blur, like the blinking taillights signal to follow in the blur. Right, which goes back to this reading of him riding behind the car, or the speaker riding behind the car, right, or the truck rather, right. And then that muzzle flash is doing this wonderful double duty. You get the coyote and this image of violence. Well, I have to say, I'm sort of with Jason on this one. When we decided to talk about these two, I thought, oh, definitely the first one. Second one, meh. And I'm not. And I think the meh was because of the sort of spread of the poem. I wasn't fully convinced of the line breaks, like where they were landing and what the emphasis was on the sort of like like how the second lines were structured after, you know, a line break. And I think Miriam put her finger on why I was not feeling the ending as strongly as I do now. So, yeah.
All right.
Should we vote?
Yeah.
So, yeah. You guys ready?
Wait, I have to call up the technology. All right, hold on a minute.
Are we voting on the poem as it is? Are we going to ask for an edit, or?
Well, I didn't hear us talk about an edit, Miriam. What were you thinking?
Oh yeah,
that's cutting away.
The line. I think the line break she was talking about.
What line break?
Like the final stanza. If we pull up a 16-wheeler passes like a war, so it's part of the previous stanza, and begin the final stanza with I draft. I should mention this is not a deal breaker for me, but I just thought that it might be an interesting edit.
Yeah, so a 16-wheeler would be part of the previous stanza. So 1, 2, 3, 4. It would be part of stanza 4. And then the final stanza starts with I draft in its wake.
I think it's a nice edit.
I think so too.
Tim and I are both literally shrugging our shoulders. So I guess we're saying we don't see that it does that much, or it's not necessary. What are you saying, Tim?
Yeah, I don't really look at poems, I think, in the same way as poets, where for me, I like both of those lines next to each other. So I don't quite feel like I have the authority to comment because I'm mostly focused on the narrative of the poem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Tim, can I ask you though? I think you just put your finger on how I would describe the logic of the edit.
Mm-hmm.
So the way where the line sits in the final stanza actually scrambles the narrative for me. Like, I actually can't tell what happens, right? Is it the car behind the truck or the car passing, like the truck passing the car? But moving it to the penultimate stanza and giving a little space actually makes it much clearer that the car is behind the truck, right? It's just like a simple narrative move. Now, and I say that, and I turn this out to you guys for a question. If the scramble and confusion is productive for the poem, then let's leave it as it is. But if the clarity is better for the poem, I think we should just move the line up to the penultimate stanza. So what do you think?
Let me just add one little other comment. Not that we're looking for form, but we've got a 4-line stanza, then a 9-line stanza, then a 4, then an 8, and a 5. So if that line came up, it would make it 4-9-4-9-4.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It would make it more symmetrical. Not that matters at all, but it is kind of funny.
I think it does. I like patterns.
You like the symmetry?
Mm-hmm.
I do.
Okay. All right, then. Let's vote and assume that we will ask for that edit. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Text Ryan. And in the studio, we're going to say 1, 2, 3, vote. And from San Francisco, New York, and Abu Dhabi, the vote is 3 yes. So
go Coyotes.
Did it again. Right. Unanimous twice in a row. That is amazing.
Go Team Coyote.
Go Team Coyote. Coyote and Coyotes. That's kind of funny and wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so 2 for monsters, which is wonderful. And today, rather than discuss more poems, we're to discuss an issue that we kind of touched on before in a different way, but it all has to do with monetizing publishing, or I don't know. I'm thinking about Tim. You're the one who brought to our attention that on the different independent campaigns like Kickstarter and Indiegogo, there are people that are looking for funding for their books. And I guess what I'm referring to in the past that we talked about is magazines that are asking for money to respond more quickly to you, and money, if you have enough money, you can get people to respond to you faster. You can get critiques from editors.
Mm-hmm.
So now here are people without money asking the world to just fund their book projects. And what were you thinking about this issue, Tim, when you first saw it?
Well, I started researching when I was digging around through journals for looking for poets that I liked. Sometimes I'll do that and I'll email them and ask to send you poems or something like that. And I want to find out a little more about them. So I found some poets, when I Googled their name, had Kickstarter projects.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Which I thought was odd because I really liked their work. And if it was out there, I would probably buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was working for a small press, I'd probably try to hunt them down and try to get them to send me a manuscript before they publish with somebody else. And I feel like it left a kind of a sour taste in my mouth when I saw it. And I feel like, I started writing down some notes at night and ended up with this sort of like messy pile of Jerry Maguire manifesto types of pages.
Hey, can we publish that?
Yeah.
And
can you read some of that for us? No.
You know what? There's a quote from Steve Albini that I really liked. Does everyone know Steve Albini? He's a producer. He's a record producer for punk rock bands in the 80s. I can't find it here. But basically, to paraphrase what he said, if you're not smart enough to find out a way to have your work be self-sufficient, then you're an idiot. I mean, he basically he just
Wow.
Steve Albini's great because he just says what's on his mind and he just throws it out there, and then you look at it and you think, well, I guess I have to think about that, you know, and
Marion, there's another T-shirt. Sorry.
and I was thinking, so I was thinking about that all, you know, this morning and last night, and I feel like some of the things that we value about people who have published books is that they have created a narrative or a stack of poems that represent enough about the human condition that somebody else will back them, will risk their money and their time to support your idea. And you've risked your time and your life and hours of your life and arranged your life to put this manuscript together. So each side is taking this great risk. And part of what I value about writers is that they've done this risk, and there's no guarantee that the risk is going to pay off. And that's part of what's kind of amazing about writers, that they're going to do it anyway. And to have people fund it makes it more about the writer and their experience of hugging their book than them giving us something to think about. When you think about great shorts, I mean, the short stories that have moved me tremendously in my life, like Amy Hempel's In the Cemetery Where Al Jolson was Buried, tons of Flannery O'Connor stories, Tobias Wolff stories that have just stuck and changed the way I live. That is what it's about. And that's what it's about when you write a story, is you want to nail something in a way where you're going to change the trajectory of somebody's life or even their week or their moment, or so you're going to affect them.
Yeah.
And it's not about whether you can hold it up and tap dance. I mean, you know, whether it's not about your experience. And that's, I think, one of the struggles of writing, is when you change over from where it's about you to where it's about your audience and that relationship. And to me, Kickstarter pollutes that experience. But I don't want to say Kickstarter pollutes every experience, because I'm not sure. I think in some other forms and genres, it seems like it's okay, because when that type of writing isn't about the same experience as literary fiction or poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Well, wait, Tim, can you talk to me a little bit more about that? Like, I actually don't quite see the link between the platform and the pollution of the experience, right? Because, you know, crowdfunding has really grown in popularity in the last 6 years, say, for journalism. Like it you know, I think the Pew Fund is reporting that, you know, there's quite a bit of money now, like $2 million or something, that goes to crowdfunded journalism, which was so not what's done, 10 or 6 years ago, even like in that window. And for journalism, they take this approach of it actually frees journalism from the marketplace. It allows people to do slow journalism, right? It's another alternative to the media ownership model that's in place that does impact journalism, right? So thinking about crowdsourced funding for the arts, talk to me a little bit more about that.
Well,
and why that
journalism
pollutes
makes more sense, because if you're a journalist, you still have to stick to the code of journalistic ethics or whatnot. You have to have sources and you have to have fact checking, and it's not. And I think journalism isn't automatically about the writer. So for me, that the quality of the product they put out polices itself. Where with fiction,
right? So
what's that?
I'm sorry. So with something like Kickstarter or Indiegogo, it's the lack of the editorial presence, the lack of the mechanism of the gatekeeping function of the editor. Is that part of what's lacking in your
for fiction? For me, yeah. So, but for journalism, a good journalism is self-policing.
I'm sorry. who's talking.
You
now.
go. Sorry,
No,
it's just a
she's been
delay.
here.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I actually, you know, there are good projects and there are bad projects, and there are people who represent themselves in a way that is distracting from their work, and people who are really just trying to get paid for their intellectual labor. And I think that, you know, we can talk about the ways in which self-publishing has changed because of Kickstarter and these various technologies, but there's actually a very rich history of self-publishing in, you know, literary production. And it's a history that I think I'm actually quite grateful for. Like if you know, if Jane Austen didn't pay for the publication of Sense and Sensibility, if Virginia Woolf didn't start a press, it's especially, and of course I'm naming women in particular because I associate it with an opportunity for sometimes less represented voices or marginalized voices to really, you know, get their feet under them and get people to see their work. And, you know, I think there's something just as romantic when you talk about risk taking about a whole bunch of people, some of whom you know and some of whom have just read your Kickstarter page, deciding that they want to risk their hard-earned money on your work. I think that's a different avenue of romanticizing the role of a writer and a reader that is, you know, it's interesting. It doesn't bother me.
Does it obligate you as an artist to your audience in any way, though? That's
well,
really
I think
a
that
real
you're
question.
always, but I think that if you're trying to publish to make money, whether you're doing that through an editor and a publishing house that's established, or you're doing it through your Kickstarter, then you are indeed obligated to your audience. If you're trying to kind of preserve a particular sense of your artistic, you know, vision, regardless of your readers, then it doesn't obligate you. But I think that the thing here is it's a new tool for an age-old thing.
Right. So there's something out there, by the way, called patreon.com or Patreon, and it's crowdfunding for artists and creators. So if you're like a blogger or a YouTuber or a cartoonist, Patreon is really like set up for you to make connections with potential funders and crowdsource your work. And that, Kathy, is the one that reminds me of what you just said, which is like, does it obligate you to your funders, right? Mm-hmm. And Patreon recommends things like, you know, having a special like G chat with your funders as part of the donation package. So if they donate X, they get to have a conversation with the artist, or, you know, or they're commenting on the work as it proceeds. So it does open lines of communication, and there's a little bit of like
obligation,
like perks involved with the donation, I think. But so I would encourage everybody to check out Patreon. It's an interesting version of this, specifically set aside for artists and creative people.
Yeah, we'll put a link to that on our pages.
I mean, there have been a couple of very high-profile authors who started off in self-publishing and vanity presses and basically made enough money and decided to move to presses because of what you get from a press, right? So if you're going to Simon & Schuster, they have this entire machinery where they copy edit, and they have book designers, and they have a network of bookstores, and they have a network of book clubs, and they know how to do publicity, and they know how to place reviews. And I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because, you know, in the 90s, if you were sort of being trained as a poet, you were not trained to be entrepreneurial at all. And in fact, being entrepreneurial was going to isolate you from what you wanted, right? Because if you're self-publishing, or if you're doing a vanity press, you know, then you're not eligible for the grants, you're not eligible for fellowships. The entire apparatus of support that existed for people who were writing poetry and fiction had really kind of insisted on people kind of not being entrepreneurial. And now that there is this entrepreneur, and so I didn't really encounter it until I started meeting visual artists at residencies, and they were like super entrepreneurial. And I was kind of like, oh, that's kind of cool, but we can't really do that over here because like that's just not how we roll. And I don't know, like, I mean, I met with a student the other day. My chair brought a student to my office, and she had written, it was like, she's written 2 books. And I was like, okay, so let's look at the books. And she'd self-published them. And, you know, she'd paid a lot of money. She'd paid like $1,000 overall. She had paid like over $1,000 for these 2 books. And, you know, and she's a 20-year-old student. but she'd also sold $800 worth of them. And I was kind of impressed. I was like, all right, like, and if you can kind of keep that spirit, I mean, after our conversation where I was kind of talking about what you want from a book and how you want the book to be distributed and how you want to find a readership and all these sorts of things, she really kind of felt like this wasn't a choice that she should have made. And, and I kind of said, like, if you like the books and it was worth it to you, maybe you don't make that same decision the next time. But I don't know. I mean, in terms of like actually crowdfunding, like Miriam is saying, everyone's superhero, Walt Whitman, not published his own books. He wrote reviews of his own books and then wrote negative reviews of his own books under a pseudonym so he could respond to the negative reviews under other pseudonyms. So, I just thought, like, a friend of mine just posted a poem on Facebook where she was like, screw it. I don't, I could send this to a journal and I could get this published, but I can do this right now. So here goes. And that's nothing I would ever do, but he's pretty popular. And she also, she has a very loyal press. And in fact, I was just, as I'm in San Francisco, I saw her book on the table at the bookstore that I wandered into last night. So she's doing okay.
Yeah, I've known people who've self-published and then moved to presses too, and I don't feel like I hold their past self-publishing against them, but I feel that's a good direction. To me, the editorial wall is important, and I mean, it's mysterious and it's difficult, and of course, we hate it probably a lot more than we like it. But I feel like when you do get past it, I think it's very gratifying, and you understand it more. And after reading it in the magazine, I understand a lot more about the function of the editorial wall, and it's not just some people saying no to everything and publishing their friends. It's people talking about poems line by line and look at how images match up together. And when I get rejections now, I was talking to my class yesterday about this. I don't mind getting the rejection that says, "Sorry, this isn't right for us, but we really enjoyed these characters. Blah blah blah. Please send us more work." Because then I know maybe 3 out of 7 liked it, and now I have to find a room where 5 out of 7 liked it, and I get to know. I have gotten to know a lot more journals and what the potential audiences are, and it's a long, slow process that I find to be fascinating and useful and really helps me with my own work when I'm in the hole grinding it out. And I understand the temptation of wanting to get a book published and the frustration of like when we were talking with the agent last week in Kathy's class, she showed us the whole list of publishers who said, we really liked it, but it's not right for us at the time. And the publishers really did like it, but it really wasn't the right time. And I think that's a problem with the literary landscape as well.
Right.
Of the big presses.
So much niche.
Yeah,
stuff.
and the anti-competitive aspect of corporate publishing.
Right. And I think we veered this conversation right into self-publishing, and where we started, Kickstarter and Indiegogo are different because you're asking other people to help you self-publish, right? And so I don't know. I mean, I guess there's many, many choices to be made. You know.
Did you read the piece about Tyler Not Gregson in the Times? He's one of the Instagram poets. And so he built a following. He has 560,000 followers on Instagram.
Wow.
And his book of poetry sold 120,000 copies. The Times article puts it in the context of Louise Glick's last collection sold 20,000 copies.
Right.
And he's not on Indiegogo. He's not. I mean, he went on Instagram and built a followership that way, and now is kind of a best-selling author. But I don't know that that's that different from kind of an Indiegogo, from like going to.
I think it is. I think it's grossly different. He had to grow his platform and grow his audience by his work. Indiegogo is just saying, "Give me money." It's very different.
But I think that there's lots of different ways you could kind of post that on Indiegogo. And we're talking about self-publishing instances in history, but those writers did go to their friends or family who were people they knew and ask them for money. So, I mean, not to totally flatten out the difference in technology, but it really is the same thing. It's like, I have this piece of work for whatever reason that's not getting picked up, and can you help me kind of bring it to the world? I think that makes sense for some writers.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I wonder, is there a substantive difference between sending out an email blast to all of your friends saying, hey, my book just came out on Red Hen, please buy it, and an Indiegogo campaign saying, hey, I have this book, please make it happen? You're asking for the same amount of money, right? You're asking for the same exchange of here's my book for your cash.
There's a lot of market differences in the example you just gave. I mean, if a book is out from Hen Press, then it already addressed the editorial concerns that Tim was talking about. If you have it up on Indiegogo, then that's you. And
so it really is that in terms of the curatorial process of having
which was what Tim was talking about, the curatorial process.
I just happen to be poking through Indiegogo, and I'm looking at one campaign that's for American Bystander #2 for the After Party, right? And it's a comedy quarterly, and they made $40,000 or $36,000 US for Time to Bring Back the American Bystander 2 print comedy quarterly, in case you missed it. And I'm looking at this, and I'm sorry, I'm clicking through and talking to you guys, wondering about using Indiegogo as a marketing campaign. So let's say Jason's book, which is out on Red Hen Press, if he says, I don't want to ask Red Hen to put me on a campaign tour, right? A bus tour across the US, but I do want to buy a bus for my own tour. I'm going to go to Indiegogo and do a campaign to get my psychedelic bus, right? Maybe that's the future of the funk, that we start thinking about Indiegogo for developing marketing campaigns for our art, not only to support the art, but to market it.
I mean, I would advise anyone against it. I mean, if anyone came to my office and said, I have this book of poems and I'm thinking about going on Indiegogo to get it published, I would say you're not going to get what you want, because the only people who are going to be aware of it are going to be the people who buy it, or the people
right.
you know directly and kind of. And so part of what a press does is it builds you a larger audience. That what we love about a press, beyond kind of a curatorial impulse, and particularly presses that have really beautiful personalities like Wave Press, where you kind of have this sense of what's happening. They're sort of curating a really beautiful list. It finds you a readership that you wouldn't have had access to otherwise. And an Indiegogo campaign can really only keep the people who already know who you are in your loop.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and it really is like a cash transaction too. It gets you cash to do the work, right? To do the project. Whereas something like publication with Wave, or, a prestige press, gives you cultural capital and symbolic capital, not necessarily economic capital, although that sometimes happens, right? So getting a line on your CV that your book is out with FSG is going to impact your career more directly, right? Than scoring, $10,000 on Indiegogo.
You know what, Marion?
Right?
I think you've come up with the perfect idea, though. Why not get your book from your prestigious press and then get your psychedelic van from Indiegogo? Right?
Psychedelic van.
I am all about it.
And then you have another Kickstarter campaign for the Partridge Family band that you hire to sing songs about your damn book.
We're going to take this podcast on the road in a psychedelic van. Anything is possible.
So are you going to put up the campaign to get the PBQ van?
We're going to get it.
Psychedelic vans we can go on tour.
It's already done. That's this summer. That's July, guys. It's happening. That's the month of July.
Take this on the road.
Yep.
Listen, we should wrap up. So we would love to know what everyone else thinks about all of these ideas. Please let us know on our Facebook page. This is episode 7. Thank you for your patience. Thanks for listening. Thanks to our engineer for today, Ryan McDonald, and thank you, Sarah Aikett, for furiously
Thank
taking notes. I can't wait to see these notes on this particular podcast. Thanks for being here, San Francisco, New York, and Abu Dhabi. Sign up for our email list if you're in the area. Go visit our website. If you send us a self-addressed stamped envelope, we will send you a really cool PBQ podcast Slush Pile sticker. So keep reading. Thank you.
This podcast is produced through a joint venture of Drexel University's Office of Information Resources and Technology and the Painted Bride Quarterly magazine. This podcast is the property of Painted Bride Quarterly magazine. All rights reserved.